All right, well, we've got a UNLV sports science conversation, and the whole idea of this podcast, if you will, is to talk with people who are in the sports industry. And I really like talking with UNLV alumni. And we've got a UNLV alum here. We have Jesse Clingman. Hey, Jesse, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good, and happy Thanksgiving. This is being recorded on the week of Thanksgiving, so thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah.
And thanks for being on this sports science conversation. And it's so cool to have you on here. One, because you and I worked together during your master's program, and you did a really innovative thesis in that you looked at in essence, the energetic cost of baseball pitching, which is not something that has been done the way that you've done it. And you were very innovative with that approach. But before we get to that, because I do want to touch on that, I want you to sort of tell us your title, what your job is, and what your day-to-day routine looks like.
Okay. So my title is coordinator of biomechanics and pitching. I have my day to day is kind of weird. It changes every day, but I usually start out with a group wellness and fitness class a little bit early in the morning. And so this is kind of what we call our normal population because we work with a lot of athletes. So programming, writing something for that, and then making sure that they get through the workout safe and we can modify things. So a lot of time in the gym early on, and then a decent amount of the day is spent to programming throwing athletes or programming people in the weight room. And then from about 12 to 5, I'm actually in the weight room, and we use a semi-private model, so it's not technically like personal training one-on-one, but there is a lot of one-on-one interaction with athletes from all different sports. We
Hmm.
have a lot of baseball players, but we actually have a lot of volleyball players right now too, which is
Oh,
kind of fun.
interesting.
Yeah, we've had a couple of hockey players. We have one football player. We haven't broke into that scene too much yet, but it's kind of fun. So you get a mix of people from a whole different backgrounds, and then I either finish the night with throwing training sessions where I'm trying to help people become a little bit more efficient or avoid injury in pitching, specifically baseball pitching, and or we finish by training the CSN baseball team in the weight room. They come in and train with us 3 nights a week, so it just kind of depends on the night how it finishes off. So.
That's got to be exciting. I mean, you're working with all, like you said, all different types of athletes and all different sports. So that's going to be fun. So you've got to adjust your training based upon the sport that they're in, the level that they're at, and I guess even their goals. Is that how you approach it?
Yeah, for sure. So if we have somebody come in, we always start with an assessment and we try and it's almost like our version of the FMS. So we want to get a feel for their mobility, run them through some movement screening and see maybe they have a lack of range of motion or whatever it is. And then that helps us adjust our program. And then the other thing that we do too is if we like, so when we first started to get in a couple of volleyball players, me and my director went to several volleyball games so that we could watch the sport a little bit more in person and be like, okay, what should we emphasize in this? Like, what do we? And the funny thing about volleyball is, I mean, especially when they hit, it's still a pretty. There's a lot of similarities to baseball, throwing overhand with that overhand motion. They've got to be a little bit more explosive and jump, but that same hitting the ball, it's like, okay, there's some similarities there. So luckily for us, we were able to use some of the stuff we were already doing and just modify it a little bit to fit their needs a little bit. But it's a lot of fun getting a whole bunch of different sports and different people. It's pretty fun.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. And in fact, when we did some lacrosse research early on, we actually borrowed a lot of the knowledge from baseball pitching
Yeah.
because, trying to find those similarities between sports. All right. So what you talked about an assessment piece. What type of tools do you use in an assessment of these athletes or baseball pitching even specifically?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different assessment protocols. One of the things that we'll definitely use is like a goniometer to check ranges of motions and see how deep they can get into things. We'll use a PVC pipe because we'll have them do certain overhead things and like we want to see how they move with certain constraints.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that we will use, so we have basically a scale that we've created as far as like it's basically like a 1 to 5 scale, and we would consider 3 average for the people that we see in there, 5 above average, and then 1 is below average. And then other than writing down specific like 25 degrees of range of motion or whatever it is. We just track it all on one piece of paper. And it's just, we're looking more for movement quality and ranges of motion. So it's not too crazy as far as technology with what we use, but we did just come to an agreement with Vault. So we're looking at using some of their stuff for our assessment now.
Awesome. And yeah, we were just talking about that beforehand because we're trying to get the same type of system that you have. So talk a little bit about what that system involves in terms of the instrumentation.
Yeah, so Valve, we got their force platforms to start, and so we have a very specific jump protocol. Luckily, I had one that I had implemented at Utah Tech University in my undergrad. So we took a lot of the things that I did there and just kind of adjusted it to how we wanted it. So there'll be a full counter movement jump, squat jump, single leg jump with the Valve force plates, the platforms as part of the assessment now. And then included in that, they have a dynamometer. So we're going to do grip strength for baseball players for sure. And then I know it obviously has a gyroscope in it, but in one of the pieces, it actually will automatically measure the range of motion. So there's a wrist strap that we can put on people. And for example, we can take them through like shoulder flexion, and then that'll give us the total arc range of motion. So it's just going to be another way for us to get a little bit more consistent with the numbers we're measuring, as long as we cue the movements right. But the main thing we're looking for is those force platforms, some of the like the power output, and we specifically like to look at watts per kilogram, and then just all the details that come with the force platforms is what we'll use to do that assessment now.
I love it. So you've got a broad range from qualitative assessments to quantitative assessments. So,
Yeah.
all right. So this sounds incredibly interesting. At what point in your pursuit of academics did you say, this is the job I want? Or when did you know that this was the job that you wanted?
So it all starts back when I was still playing baseball in college. I always felt like I worked hard, but I was always mediocre. I was never as good as some of the guys around me. And so I finally decided when I stopped playing baseball that I was going to go to school and figure out why I wasn't as good as the other guys. And long story short, it led to me meeting Dr. Travis Ficklin, who's a biomechanist at Utah Tech. And he starts talking about research. I was actually in a motor control class with him. And we start talking baseball back and forth, and he starts talking to me about biomechanics. And he just looked at me and he said, "We need to come on Friday morning. We have they called it the Biomechanics and Sports Science Club." And he said, "You need to be there." I was like, "Okay." So I showed up and we started doing some research there, and he's a baseball guy. So one of the first projects we did was like digitizing pitchers and baseball players. And it was just like, this is it. This is where I'm going to be. And it just kind of happened that way.
Oh, I love it. I love when you take an interest that you have in this case, sport of baseball pitching and pursue the science behind pitching.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It
talk a
was
little bit about your degree path that got you to where you are now.
right. So after playing in a couple of different colleges, I went to Utah Tech. It was formerly Dixie State. So when I was there and when I graduated, that's what it was. It's Utah Tech now. But so during my time there, I got an exercise science, a 4-year degree in exercise science. Completed a couple of research projects, and while I was there, one of the projects actually got me an internship with a very big company in Seattle.
Hmm.
And that helped me do even more research. And then after finishing my undergrad, I just knew that with what I wanted to do for a career, I wasn't competitive enough with just an exercise science degree. And I knew more than anything, my undergrad taught me how much I loved actually reading, interpreting, and doing research. And I'm like, I got to go somewhere where I can keep doing this. And so I looked up a couple of different programs and places that I thought would be a good fit. And after looking through some of the faculty in the UNLV master's department, the department with you guys, I mean, when you see Dr. Gabrielle Wolf and Dr. Poston and read some of your guys' research, it was like, okay, like there is a lot of good stuff going on here. And that just, I ended up reaching out to Dr. Navalta, and he emailed me back. He's like, yeah, you need to apply. And that's just
Uh,
kind of what happened.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, we have a really strong department in many different areas, which is really a cool thing. So
Right.
on your undergrad though, you actually got involved in research, which is really impressive. So taking courses wasn't enough. You wanted to dive into the hands-on lab experience.
Yeah, for sure. And it was, I mean, it helped that we were doing research that was something that I was super interested in. I
Hmm.
mean, so we did the first one I did, we digitized pictures and we were specifically looking at a mechanical piece called hip and shoulder separation
Hmm.
and how it correlated to velocity. There was also a really cool study on anthropometrics and rock climbers, and we were trying to see if there was differences in elite rock climbers and amateurs with their anthropometrics, which was super interesting.
Uh,
The second year I was looking at force plate. There's a term, it's called free moment. It's something that Bertec force plates will measure, and we were looking at that in hitters and pitchers, which was super interesting. And then we actually did a helmet one. We had a professional BMX rider in our lab, and he convinced us to do a helmet study. So, I mean, it just helped that there was a lot of cool stuff going on and stuff that was actually interesting. So,
Oh, that's great. And it's a great way to apply the knowledge that you're learning in your courses at the same time and sort of gives it some context. So, all right. So now, and then you did an internship as well. So you're very engaged as an undergrad student. And I can see why Dr. Navalta, once he got you on the phone, was like, hey, apply to our program because we love
yeah,
it when students are that engaged, especially outside the classroom. All right, so I'm sort of leading into this next question, which is your answer is going to be obvious, but I want to still hear it.
yeah.
What advice would you give to an undergraduate student looking to go into a graduate program?
So I got to go back to Dr. Travis Ficklen. He in his motor control class, we had just got done talking about a paper, and he explains it all. And I remember this sentence; it's burned into my head. He said, my job is to introduce this stuff and help you see things in a new light, but it's up to you to chase the rabbit down the hole. And he
Mm,
said, your education is what you make it. And it was like,
yep.
okay. So instead of just leaving the class, I went and started reading some more research on some of that stuff. And then that's where I kind of got a taste for research where I was like, okay, like this is kind of fun how people are answering some of these questions. So I think the answer that you're alluding to is I think the single best piece of advice would be read research, but learn how to interpret it. And I think I was okay at interpreting it. And then after even working with Dr. Schilling in the master's program, it's like I feel very confident in my ability to interpret things a little bit more. And it just makes it so much more fun.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of undergrad students may not even know that there's even this research angle to get involved in because you're busy taking classes and checking boxes for working towards that degree program. So it is neat that you've really sort of grabbed onto that. How about maybe we need to go into your master's program a little bit because it's not a straight path to get to the type of job that you're in now. So talk a little bit about how your master's program was helpful to get you in this position, or maybe that's giving too much credit to the master's program because I think you really created this type of position that you're doing.
Yeah, so I was doing my master's program, and I mean, luckily, the position that I had as a research assistant under you, I was involved in a lot of different things like that you were looking at.
Mhm.
And obviously, with your background in triathlon, I was trying to tailor my master's degree. And like, let's think about like what's something cool. So I was diving into all the triathlon research, and we had the Mayan Tech shorts and like all the cool things that I was, and even the Boost treadmill. I mean, there was just a lot of moving parts that led to me thinking so hard about a thesis that I could really be proud of. And basically, it led to me sending an innocent email to a local PT asking him how he would do a manual muscle test on a couple of different muscles. And a week later, he invited me over for lunch, and then an hour later, he gave me a job, and I wasn't even looking for a job. So, but I think that like you kind of hinted at it earlier. I think that one of the coolest things, or one of my favorite things to do, is read research, but also try and figure out how it might connect dots in different fields or different sports. And I think that's where it happened, where I was thinking about the free moment stuff that we were doing with baseball, and I'm like, that's got to be important for triathletes, and maybe it has there's been some studies on its component with like gait and everything.
Hmm.
But then I started to think about like testing it a little bit further as well. I was like, okay, well, how do we even assess its contribution? Does it matter? And it just led to me getting a part-time job with Tim. And then Tim kind of heard about some of the stuff I was doing in the master's program. He starts asking questions and getting to know me, and it just becomes like, well, we should do that here. And I'm like, well, I agree, we should do that here. And then it ended up being a full-time job.
That's amazing. And, I really attribute that approach to getting this position, the way that you approach research, and that is very innovative. And, we started off talking a little bit about your thesis on looking at energetic cost of baseball pitching. That was not easy because there's no method set up ahead of time to be able to do energetic cost of baseball pitching. Why don't you just briefly describe what you ended up having to come up with in order to collect those data?
Right. So, like you said, there had never really been anything done on it because most of the time when you do energetics, it's on a cart in a lab, and it's really hard to get pitchers on a mound in a lab with a mask on. And I remember I was in one of Dr. Navalta's classes, and somebody pulled out the K5. I'm like, what's that? And he's like, it's a portable metabolic cart. I was like, whoa,
Mhm.
that's cool. And I think that me and you had a discussion about the overlap in baseball and triathlon and how you have to worry about, is it aerobic? And there's actually a big debate in baseball right now whether or not pitchers should train a certain way based off like to try and either match or mimic the demands of the sport itself. And but the problem with the K5 is it's worn like a backpack. And elite throwers, I mean, there's a lot going on from the top half. So I initially put it on one of Dr. Navalta's grad students, and I said, try and throw with this arm. And he's like, yeah, it's a little bit weird. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want, it would be hard to try and get outs if I was wearing that while I was pitching, right? Which is the goal while you're pitching. And so what I ended up creating was this device that connected to an L screen, and an L screen is just a protective screen that's in front of pitchers. And it's basically like the prototype or the thing that I made was a PVC pipe that went across the top, so it kind of went over the top of the pitcher and then down to the ground. And then I just basically put the K5 on a little pulley system that went back and forth on the PVC pipe. And so as the pitcher threw, it would travel down with them, but they weren't actually wearing it. I mean, obviously they had to throw with a mask on, which is interesting. Every guy had something to say about the mask, but it was effective in the fact that like every guy said it was weird, but I felt like after like 5 pitches, after my warm up pitches, I was able to kind of ignore it. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, like that's definitely a step in the right direction. So it just kind of that whole me having to think about I've got to be able to keep it close enough to them that they can wear it without like tugging on the machine and doing a bunch of damage to the machine. But I've also got to let it travel with them because they obviously when you pitch, you move down the mound. So it was kind of tough, and it took about like 4 practice runs of putting it on guys while they had the mask on and testing it out. The first version didn't work, so it took a couple of tries to make sure that I was ready, but it ended up working, and it turned out pretty cool, I thought.
Oh, very cool. And I think it's a testament that, you know, research is not easy. Good research is really hard.
Yeah.
And it starts with an idea, but then sometimes you have to be innovative in terms of how you do things, and especially in the sports world, because some movements are so complex.
Right.
And you've gone through a lot of hurdles to do some of the work. It sounds, on one hand, it comes across as being very easy, but it's hard work.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing. And that's what, when I first decided that I wanted to get into research, one thing I remember hearing is research is not glamorous. Like reading the papers is cool, but the research, and I think the fact that my first research project involved old school DLP, like
Hmm.
the fact that I was able to go through all that and digitize all those points at the end of it, still say, man, that was fun. Like I knew I was kind of crazy enough to want to actually do research. So it's for sure. You do hours and hours of work, and nobody sees the behind the scenes stuff. Everybody reads the papers like that's cool, and it's like
Yeah.
yeah, it was horrible at times, but it turned out pretty cool.
Yeah, sometimes you put so many hours into one particular part of the project, and it shows up as a single sentence in the manuscript, and it just doesn't do the work justice that way. But
For
we
sure.
all know when we read something that we can see the work behind it.
So
And so it really is neat. I mean, you're a very independently driven person and you have, a good vision of what you want to do. And it does take that persistence to really keep seeking out more information. All
yeah.
right. So what do you like to do outside of work and academics?
So I have so my so one thing that we like to do is we like to get out and hike. It sounds very basic, but me and my wife, we like to get outdoors and just be outside. We always joke that being on top of a mountain just reminds us just how humble we need to be. It's like, all right, maybe things aren't as important as they seem when you're on top of a mountain. So
Mhm.
we like to get outside and be outside. Obviously, I like to watch sports. I love all sports. I played them growing up. And then I have a dog that takes up quite a bit of my time. So other than that, just I mean, I spend a lot of time working, but my work doesn't feel like work right now. I'm fortunate
Mhm.
enough where I'm actually enjoying it. So other than those things, it's kind of been fun to just kind of focus and try and build a business over there. So
Oh, I love it, and I love that you like sports and you like being active, and you sort of alluded to this is that even while you're doing your activity, you're thinking about analytics is what you're or analysis of some sort.
yeah, I think one thing for sure, and I still this one gives credit to you when I get asked questions, especially because we work, the clinic is right with us, and so there'll be times where people will come over and ask us questions, and I always try and have a formula pop up in my head as the first way to answer that
Yeah.
question, and I can just hear you saying that in your lecture. So yeah, it's and I kind of I think I have that mind, just wanting
Mhm.
to, you know, I think if you can provide something objective,
Mhm.
more people are willing to buy into that a little bit. And so I think starting with the formula and going from there is actually a
Yeah.
good way to start. I
All
can't
right.
tell you, it's kind of crazy. When we first started drawing free body diagrams, I wondered how often I would do it. I draw one at least once a week,
There
talking
you
to
go.
teaching a patient or somebody. So
Oh, I love it, and that's the biomechanist at heart in you, and so I love that. But okay, so now I do want to swing it back to the type of work you do, though. You mentioned some other faculty in other areas. What are some other areas in exercise science besides biomechanics that you sort of tap into?
yeah, so I think obviously I think the big part of it is biomechanics, but then exercise physiology
Mhm.
because we're responsible for conditioning people and getting people back to certain like getting ready for um, their sport. And so some of it is exercise physiology for sure, trying to prepare people and get the body ready to perform. Where anytime you work in a gym and work with athletes, you have to be a little bit of a sports psychologist. There's times where you got to be ready to answer questions, and I think the just remind people to be where their feet are. Like just
Mhm.
be there. Like this is what we're doing. Let's be here today. So sports psychology for sure. And then I think motor control is something that or I guess motor programming. I mean, it's all relevant in some way, but I think one thing that I used a whole bunch in both the weight room and even with throwing guys is trying to really focus on external cues. I
Yeah.
hate using internal cues. So
Yeah.
I mean, really, if you go through the day, like my whole day, I can think of times where I'm kind of dabbling in quite a bit. It just biomechanics is at the face of it.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I love it. You got to have the whole package. It is amazing that you got to tap into all these different areas. You can't just be the world's best, whatever. You've got to
right,
understand sport performance and injury and training someone. You really got to tap into all these areas. So that's
right,
great to hear.
yeah,
Just this is so good. I am so glad that we caught up, and I'm so glad that you decided to join this sports science conversation and talk a bit about what you do and how you got here. Any last words of encouragement for either our undergrad or grad students?
I mean, I think for sure that the best piece of advice I could be is you have to be passionately curious. If you find something that you're genuinely curious about and you're not willing to just accept somebody else's interpretation or just go, "Oh, that's cool," and leave it at that, like that's all it did for me was I didn't want to just listen to what somebody else said. I wanted to answer and ask questions. And so I think being genuinely and passionately curious is the best piece of advice I could give anybody in an undergrad chair right now.
I love it. I love it. That is a great way to wrap this up. Thank you again. Have a great Thanksgiving. It's been a pleasure catching up with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone.